You don't notice the observer immediately. The room feels ordinary, soft conversation, subtle movement, glasses placed on tables. Someone adjusts their sleeve, someone else checks their phone and puts it away. Nothing unusual, nothing sharp. The lighting is low enough to soften faces. The air feels steady, comfortable. People lean toward each other when they speak. Small reactions ripple through the space. A laugh spreads. A sigh follows a story. Energy rises and falls naturally. Then you sense something stable inside the motion. In one corner, not hidden but not central, someone sits slightly apart. Not isolated, just not woven into the center. Their body is relaxed, back straight but not rigid, hands resting without tension, no restless gestures, no scanning that looks urgent. They watch. Their eyes move carefully but never fast. They follow conversations without entering them too deeply. When someone speaks, they give attention. When someone finishes, they shift focus smoothly. No visible judgment, no visible excitement. If the room grows animated, they do not rise with it. If the tone lowers, they do not sink. Their expression adjusts enough to remain appropriate. A small smile, a quiet nod, a brief look of concern when expected. Everything fits, but nothing lingers. Others react fully. Their faces change, their shoulders tighten or relax, their tone sharpens or softens. The observer remains level, not distant, not cold, simply even. When someone directs a question toward them, they answer clearly, short, thoughtful, contained. They do not offer more than required. They do not reveal personal edges. The answer closes cleanly. Attention rarely stays on them long. They redirect it gently, a question back, a comment about the group, a shift toward someone else's story. The spotlight moves away without resistance. No one feels ignored, no one feels pushed. The observer blends into the rhythm perfectly. Yet by the end of the gathering, a quiet imbalance appears. People have shared frustrations, memories, small vulnerabilities. The observer has shared almost nothing. They've collected patterns instead. Who interrupts, who seeks approval, who hesitates before speaking, who grows louder when nervous. The room feels successful, warm, social. The observer stands to leave, calm, polite, unmarked by the atmosphere that moved everyone else. They were present the entire time, but nothing in them moved with it. This is where Jung would begin looking beneath the calm surface. Not at what the observer does, but at what that behavior protects. The observer appears steady, balanced, controlled. Their presence does not disturb the room. Their emotions do not spill. Their reactions do not exceed the moment. This looks like strength. It looks like discipline. But Jung would ask a quieter question. What had to be pushed down in order to become this controlled? No one is born neutral. Every person begins with impulses that move quickly and without permission. Anger when something feels unfair, excitement when something feels promising, jealousy when attention shifts, fear when safety feels uncertain. These reactions are natural. They rise before thought. The observer learned early that visible reaction creates exposure. Exposure invites judgment. Judgment invites discomfort. So the reactions were adjusted, smoothed, contained. Over time, this containment becomes automatic. The observer does not feel the need to express much. When something stirs inside, it is processed silently, redirected inward, filed away. Jung would call this accumulation the shadow. Not evil, not dramatic, simply the collection of everything that did not fit the chosen identity. If the identity is rational and objective, then the shadow holds the intensity. If the identity is calm and measured, then the shadow holds the urgency and desire. The observer watches others express frustration, affection, insecurity, ambition. They understand these emotions. They can analyze them clearly. But understanding is not the same as entering. The observer stays outside the emotion, even when it belongs to them. This distance creates skill. The observer becomes accurate. They read subtle shifts in posture. They notice hesitation in tone. They see patterns before others do. Observation sharpens, but something else dulls. When emotions are not practiced outwardly, they lose strength. The observer may begin to experience their own feelings as distant or unclear. Preferences feel negotiable. Desires feel unnecessary. Strong reactions feel inefficient. The shadow grows in this quiet space. Not as something violent, but as something unused. Energy that was never allowed expression remains stored. Over time, the observer may not even recognize it as theirs. Jung would not accuse the observer of coldness. He would notice protection. Protection from vulnerability. Protection from being seen too clearly. Watching becomes safer than participating. Analysis becomes safer than attachment. Control becomes safer than risk. And the longer this continues, the more the shadow holds everything that once moved freely. Not gone, just waiting behind the stillness. Waiting for a moment when watching is no longer enough. This is where Nietzsche would begin to listen differently. Not to emotion, not to silence, but to the quiet structure behind both. He would observe how the observer explains their distance, even if only to themselves. The observer does not describe their detachment as absence. They experience it as clarity. They believe they see things as they are, without exaggeration, without emotional distortion. This feels honest. It feels clean. Nietzsche would question that cleanliness. When someone refuses to feel deeply, they often call it objectivity. When someone stays outside conflict, they call it balance. When someone avoids attachment, they call it independence. These ideas sound stable, respectable. But Nietzsche would ask whether this distance is strength or protection. The observer watches others become invested. They see how emotion complicates decisions, how attachment creates bias, how loyalty bends judgment. From the outside, it looks inefficient. The observer prefers precision. Over time, this preference becomes a value. They begin to believe that remaining untouched is morally superior, that feeling less is wiser, that not reacting is maturity. Nietzsche would grow curious here. He would notice how easily the observer places themselves above the emotional field. Not loudly, not arrogantly, just quietly certain. The room becomes something to study. People become patterns. Reactions become predictable movements. The observer remains steady, interpreting rather than participating. This position feels safe. It also feels elevated. But Nietzsche would suggest that elevation can hide avoidance. When someone claims distance from emotion, they may also be distancing themselves from responsibility. Engagement requires risk. It requires choosing sides. It requires caring enough to be affected. The observer does not openly reject morality. They follow rules. They behave appropriately. They do not harm. Yet their goodness remains abstract. It costs them very little. Nietzsche would notice that values, without risk, become comfortable. When nothing is at stake, morality becomes a surface identity rather than a lived tension. The observer believes they are simply seeing clearly. But clarity without involvement can turn into quiet superiority, a sense that others are driven by impulses while they remain guided by reason. In time, this belief hardens. Watching feels wiser than feeling. Distance feels stronger than attachment. Control feels purer than vulnerability. Nietzsche would not accuse, he would simply point out the pattern. When someone steps outside emotion completely, they may also step outside growth. And a life spent only observing can begin to feel correct, but strangely untouched by meaning. This is where Machiavelli would stop thinking about emotion altogether. He would not ask what the observer feels. He would ask what the observer gains. Watching without feeling appears passive. It looks harmless. The observer does not interrupt, does not dominate, does not push their will forward. They sit back. They take in the room. They allow others to move first. But Machiavelli would look at outcomes, not posture. In any group, influence does not always belong to the loudest person. It often belongs to the one who understands the map. The observer builds that map quietly. They learn who needs approval, who reacts to praise, who fears exclusion, who competes, who avoids conflict. This knowledge changes the balance of power. Because the observer is not emotionally entangled, they remain clear when others become reactive. When voices rise, they stay level. When alliances shift, they notice early. When tension builds, they see where it will land. Machiavelli would see advantage in this distance. The observer does not waste energy defending pride. They do not reveal their vulnerabilities. They do not expose preferences easily. This makes them difficult to read, and what cannot be read cannot be predicted. Others begin to adjust around them without realizing it. They seek their opinion because it seems rational. They value their judgment because it appears unbiased. The observer becomes a quiet reference point. This position creates subtle authority. The observer rarely demands control. They influence by framing. A small comment here, a question there, a shift in tone that guides the direction of conversation. Because they are not emotionally charged, their input feels reasonable. Machiavelli would notice how safety becomes leverage. When people trust that someone is calm and neutral, they lower their guard. They speak openly. They reveal intentions. The observer listens. Over time, the observer may not even recognize the power they hold. It feels like simple awareness, like staying above conflict, like maintaining perspective. But perspective shapes decisions, and decisions shape outcomes. The one who watches without feeling often becomes the one who decides without resistance, not by force, not by confrontation, but by position. Machiavelli would not call this cruelty, he would call it structure. In any room, someone benefits from clarity, someone benefits from not being moved. And when emotion drives others into visible patterns, the observer stands outside them, choosing when to step in and when to remain still. Power does not always belong to the most expressive. Sometimes it belongs to the one who remains untouched long enough to see the whole board. Until the next observation.